Hello, Eric Sheptuck coming at you. Now, if you're anything like me, and you grew up with two parents, and you saw those parents argue from time to time. Uh, my parents got married in 1959, on April 4th at that, which is the day in which MLK Jr. was killed 9 months later. Or 9 years later, excuse me. But anyway, they stayed married for 41 years until my father passed away in 2000. My mother will turn 81 in August of 2018. Then, of course, there's the recently deceased Barbara Bush, who was the wife of George H.W. Bush, Bush 41. Now, they were married for 73 years before she just recently passed away. And I don't know if widower George H.W. Bush, ever struck her. I'm going to assume that he never has. I'm pretty sure it would have made it into the news during her life if that had ever been the case. But I would assume that they did sometimes disagree, and that sometimes that disagreement turned into a full-on argument. But nonetheless, we can assume that he never hit her, and we also see that they stayed together for 73 long years, longer than most people even live. But anyway, there is also healthy political controversy, healthy political disagreement in debate. But here in D.C., at the local level, we don't have that. We have a mayor who, as I've said in the past, got 42,000 votes out of a possible 380,000 in the Democratic primary in 2014, and she won. And yet we have the same mayor running for re-election with no viable competition. But as I said in my previous video, the Attorney General has literally no competition. Not just unviable people, but nobody running against him. So there is no healthy opposition from other candidates in either case. And there is no healthy opposition from the voters. So that makes me think. The AG, the Attorney General, was made an elected position so as to serve as a counterweight to the mayor's power. And the DC Council, when they passed that legislation, they actually wanted there to be healthy opposition between the mayor and the Attorney General. The mayor of D.C. has been elected since 1974. The Attorney General first got elected 40 years later in 2014. Our first ever elected AG is still trying to find his way within that dynamic and hasn't yet figured out how to serve as an effective counterweight to the power of the mayor. So if Bowser gets re-elected, then whoever is AG next year might not have really gotten themselves together well enough to serve as a healthy counterweight to the mayor's dictatorship by default. I do like to emphasize that despite her policies and what you think of her as an individual, that the dictatorial element of her office is the result of there not being enough candidates, viable candidates, and there being low voter turnout. So those things are not necessarily her fault. There are things that she can do or fail to do in order to get those effects, but at the present, I can't honestly say that I'm certain that she has made it a point to clear out all opposition. But DC, we need to get married to this idea of healthy opposition. We need to stand behind the Attorney General. We need to feed him with ideas as to what we as the people want. And we need to also encourage the council to move the Department of Open Government, headed by Tracy Hughes, at least until tomorrow, from the mayor's administration over to the Attorney General's office. And we need to do all that we can to promote healthy opposition. Now, before I sign off, let me say this a little bit too. That some people say that I'm too controversial. Well, let me point this out. It takes two to tango. And all things are relative. So, if I were to walk out onto the dance floor, as I do quite often, but if this time I were to state an absolute truth, a grim reality, then when I state it, that in and of itself is not a controversy. It doesn't become a controversy until someone decides to tango with me by disagreeing. If everybody immediately says, that grim reality is correct, that is an absolute truth, I agree, I'm with you, then there is no controversy. Me saying something initially doesn't qualify it as a controversy. It doesn't become that until you state your disagreement, okay? So there is no such thing as somebody just being controversial, because all things are relative. And you, the ones who accuse somebody of being too controversial, you're the one who's defining them as controversial by stating your disagreement. That's not to say that you shouldn't. There are healthy controversies. There are healthy debates. I just want you to understand that when you accuse somebody of being too controversial, it's often you that helps to define them as such. So if you don't like controversy, shut the fuck up.